back out here working on the IRS setup. So luckily I checked my phone because I was getting pretty close to lifting this up in the car and starting to get it mounted. And I checked it and I had a message on Instagram saying how they were excited to see the sway bar setup. Didn't have the GoPros out for this part. So I'll walk through and show you guys kind of what I did and where I'm at and how the process is going. Okay, so here is my sway bar tube. So I had to figure out how I wanted to do this, if I wanted to do a full bar all the way across or if I wanted to just make mounts. I decided to go with the full bar because I went with an 1 5/8 065 wall DOM steel tube, DOM, DOM. And that was the perfect, what I thought was the perfect wall thickness for these brass oil embedded bushings. However, I got my tube cut down the size and then I had to throw these in the freezer, heat this up, so expand the steel, compress the brass, tap these in, and then when I did that, it changed the ID just about 5/1000ths of an inch, which made it impossible to put my sway bar through this tube. And luckily, our good buddy Jace had this honing tool that runs on the drill, and I was able to run that in my brass bushing to get the correct ID again for my sway bar to have no restriction and no binding. That's as far as I've gotten. But yeah, to basically show you guys the setup a little bit, we have the tube, the bushings, my sway bar, which is 1¼ inch. And then I have these arms that are steel arms from All-Star, and they'll mount right on the ends. And then I have any spot that I want to drill a hole and add adjustment to my lower mounts on my control arms. We're not gonna get that far, but I will get this all together and start working on mounting it to the frame of the car and have everything set in, so when I get my lower control arms, I can just modify those with some tabs, add some end links, and we'll be good. All right, so here is the full setup with the arm links on. So as you see, we have full rotation of the sway bar, and it works really good. And with these All-Star arms, they actually have a spot where the bolt goes through, and it hits right on this section of the sway bar where there is a divot and goes across, so it locks it into place pretty well. These aren't tightened obviously, but there's a little bit of play there and a little bit of play on this side, but the tube's cut the right size, exactly how I wanted it, so I don't have to have any restriction, or I don't have to have a shaft collar, which was what I was going to use on the ends to locate the sway bar, but now I don't have to do that. So I'm liking it so far. It looks pretty good. I think it looks pretty sick. And I'm going to work on lifting it up in the car and trying to figure out how I'm going to position the sway bar while I mount it. Okay, so I got it set up in there. And here's kind of what it looks like. So the arms come right through here between the subframe and the original mounts for the sway bar. We got enough clearance right here at the frame. It's just about perfect. And obviously suspension's all at full droop, so we have this at the lowest point possible. Just made some space resting it on the towel here. And then we have to look at where our axles are gonna go, and we can trim this off. So we can make a cut here and make it shorter and just tuck it right behind the coilover, because we know that no matter what, as long as we're behind this, we shouldn't have any issues with the axles. And this is about the same on the other side. So yeah, looks like we have all the clearances we need. I'm glad I went with a 30-degree arm. It's just about perfect. I should be able to kind of figure out how I'm going to make my mounts and attach them to my frame right here. All right, you guys, so been out here today, haven't been filming, but Uncle Steve came over and we got the motor put back together. Valve train back in, got the valves all set and everything. We checked spring pressure, everything was good. And we borescoped the cylinders to check everything out, make sure there was nothing, you know, to get excited about. And we also replaced and put in new spark plugs. So motor is serviced, ready to go. I'm going to fill it up with oil and start getting the lines back in, plugs on, and then he'll come back over with the carb and we'll set the carb up. And we're going to a 650 carb to try that out this season. Yeah, so a little bit of a break from working on the rear end, get this stuff dialed so we're ready to go, and then I will get back onto our sway bar. So yeah, you know, little by little we're getting it all pieced back together and ready to rip again. So I got the mounts made, just a simple L bracket on the frame here, and then a hole saw for the tube, and 2 tabs that are gonna come down on each side. And so I got these all in. I riv nutted the frame itself and then got the bolts in there. But what I had a problem with was this L bracket was no longer up against the frame and clamping to the frame, and it was actually just clamping to the rivet or the riv nut itself. So what I did, and I'll show you guys when I pull it back off, is I counterbored this plate in here, so that way all our clamping force is on the frame itself. So that should make it way stronger and not as much stress on the riv nut itself. Those are in place now. We're gonna put our sway bar back in. I already put it in once and saw that we're gonna have to do some trimming on these to get the fit nice and tight so I can TIG weld it really nicely all the way across. But I gotta put it back up in there, make a few marks, pull everything back out, adjust it, put it back in there. Hopefully it's good, and I will tack it in. So here's one of the brackets, and this is the counter bore. So it's just deep enough for the riv nut to sit in it and get the clamp force onto the frame, because you can see the lips of those are the same, or they're not flush. So that's where this will goes in there and sits nice and flush now. Check it out. All right, so the tube for the sway bar is mounted and it is in. It took some extra work to get the mounting points back. you know how it is when things get welded. They like to twist a little. So got that all fixed. It's all mounted in, and then my sway bar was stuck because when I heated up the brass bushings, it changed its ID again. So I might have to hone down the center of these just a little bit more. That way it's a little bit easier and there's not as much bind in the sway bar itself. But yeah, for now I can pull it back out, clean up all the edges, and get it painted. And I have my control arms painted with the new Del rim bushings in. I just gotta press the centers, and we'll be good to go. Gonna pull this sway bar and clean up some edges, clean it up, make it all nice, and then get it sprayed. Okay, I got the sway bar tube all sprayed in Steelite Gray. This stuff looks really good. I love the Steelite stuff. So that's all finished up. Gonna let it dry tonight and not touch it. And then I will work on putting it in tomorrow, final install, and sway bar will be done. Actually, before I put it in, I have a honing tool that I talked about that I used on it originally. I bought my own. Should be here tomorrow. Got to take a couple thousandths off of the bushing again just to make sure it slides real good, and then it'll all go back together. Other than that, I got the bushings and these arms. I'm kind of bummed because I sprayed these gray and they're not going to be the same color as the Steelite, but it looked like it would dry darker than this, but that's okay. Stock arms are temporary. So other than that, we are going to work on probably the rest of our brake situation. But actually I'm not going to do anything with that yet because I'm getting new rotors. I have new ones that will show up tomorrow. So really, I can't do a whole lot more. I've got the drive shaft at Driveline Northwest, putting the new yoke in and new U-joints. But hopefully for now, we'll be good. And then in the future, I'll work on getting a better drive shaft set up. Just really can't spend the extra $700, $800 on a drive shaft right now. So we will see. Hopefully it'll hold up. Hopefully at least make it through a couple rounds until I can buy another one. And because I want to go one step up from what I already had and start looking at something from Drive Shaft Shop that I've had my eye on for a little while now. Other than that, I don't want to put the control arms in because we need to do the brake lines and we need to get those dry brake fittings in. So hopefully Tori and I can work on that this weekend. So yeah, I'm kind of waiting on stuff until tomorrow. I don't really have a whole lot more to do other than watch this paint dry for a little bit and see if it looks pretty. Steve and I need to put the carb on, do some more motor stuff. We sealed the rear of the motor because we had a small oil leak. We thought it was where the pan meets the rear main seal. We RTV'd the crap out, cleaned it, RTV'd the crap out of it, and unfortunately it's still dripping, which sucks. So we're just gonna have to monitor it, make sure it doesn't get any worse, doesn't blow out. And yeah, but got the sway bar in, and I think we were talking about getting those cleaned up, put back in. I took all that out because Tori and I worked on putting these dry brake fittings in. So we got these all set in, all dialed on each side. Love it, looks good. And we are going to get the rest of the suspension in right now and then get the brakes on so we can make the rest of the lines. So I got everything figured out with the brake caliper brackets. Got everything spaced correctly. I realized that I needed the Cobra brackets for this setup. The GTs can work, but you can see that the clearance on the bracket itself is actually a bit off. So in reality, I could make these work, but I was able to find them just at O'Reilly's for like $50. So I'll have those tomorrow. I'm just gonna have to clean these nasty things up and dial them in a little bit more. But for now, I can hang the calipers so we can do the rest of the lines and then do the rest of that. So what I'm working on now is getting the upper control arms in. I have to bend these tabs back in place to get it so that the bushings fit in. And it's a little bit of a pain. Maximum has this tool of hardware. Well, it's not really a tool, it's just some hardware that they throw together. That's supposed to help straighten it out. And it's a bit of a pain. You're supposed to do it with the subframe pulled. Obviously, I'm not going to pull the subframe to do it now. But yeah, so I'm going to work away at that, get the suspension back in, and I'm hoping to put axles in as well. I think that we're hitting the point that we can do that. So here we go. Alright you guys, so I got all the suspension in and axles. So we got our drive shaft shop axles in, you know, and right now they are at the full angle. Got the lowers back in for now. Toe links, upper control arms, which were a little bit of a pain because of the subframe, and new power stop rotors, and the brake calipers are on so we can make our lines. Looks like we're gonna have to change some stuff. We threw the lines in there and kind of mapped out how we were gonna run them, so it looks like I'll have to get some more braided line and some different fittings. But yeah, so everything looks really good. Did look at where I was going to have my sway bar mount to. I was going to have it mount to the side here at the heim and just go straight up to the sway bar, but did not realize how close the toe link is. So gonna have to change that, probably come up with some sort of mount that mounts to the top of this and then goes to this guy. But we'll get that figured out once I have some end links. So yeah, almost complete. We're almost done with the rear end. Super bummed I don't have the lower control arms, because I could do everything right and finish everything right away before testing, but we're gonna kind of have to track back once we get them and put everything in. But all of that looks good. I talked to our good buddy Joe, and there might be some changes I need to make to my lower mounts on my coilovers. We might need to get a little more ride height with a longer mount. So I have to look into that once I start putting the car on the ground and adjusting stuff, see how it sits. And also the spring rate for the GTs is different than the Cobras. The GTs are a 5K spring, and the Cobra is rated for 8K. So we might make some changes to our spring rate in the rear. Luckily Joe has an 8K spring, and if it's the same size I'll be able to use it and throw it in there in testing if I feel like the car's too soft in the rear end. But yeah, done for the night. Work on some more stuff tomorrow if I'm able to get some brake lines, if I'm able to get some of the hose. I don't know if J2 has it, so I'm about to go check, get some fittings, and then go from there. Got a few other things I can knock off the list tomorrow as well. I need to start prepping these rear knuckles. These are some spare ones that I picked up from someone. Super thankful he was willing to sell them to me. I got them for a good price. So I'll go through, clean these all up, and I have new bearings for these ones, and I need to replace a stud, or all the studs. These have the extended ones too, so I gotta get the stock ones. But yeah, you can clean those up and pretty much prep them out so I have spares to bring along with me. I'm not gonna put the maximum cross-axis joints in it. I'm gonna leave these ones because they seem to be okay. I'll have to inspect a little bit more, but don't feel like dropping the cash on some more cross-axis joints right now. But we'll work on it. If I got some extra money laying around, I'll order those up and then replace these ones. And yeah, we've been just grinding away to try to get everything done by Monday. Don't know where I left off with you guys. I think I finished up the sway bar and put the suspension in, but everything is in and torqued. Only thing we haven't torqued are our axle bolts and axle nuts, and that's why I'm working on putting the gears in so I can hold everything in position while I torque it. So I wanted to show you guys the winner's quick change. This cover here is what's on the back. Pull your nuts and boom, you're ready to put your gears in. And that's how you change the gear ratio in these things. Super sick. So yeah, we're just getting everything dialed in. I'm going to put the gears in. We will get oil in, and then unfortunately we got to do a break in with the rear end. Then we'll drain the diff fluid and put new fluid in, and then go rip it. So we're almost done here. I had to get an 8K spring for the rear, and we'll see how that works. And I'm dialing in the brake calipers and getting the brake system all done. But we got the brake lines made. Tori came out and did those for me, and we got that all set into place. New rotors on, everything else you guys have seen. We made sway bar end links. Our good buddy Dan let me come over and use the lathe, and we made those up real quick. These are kind of temporary because we're still using the stock control arm for testing. And actually, I need to check. My control arm is supposed to show up today. Or no, they're supposed to show up on Monday. I keep thinking that, yeah. Anyways. Yeah, so this is our temporary setup for now. And then we will finalize it with the new lower control arms. But yeah, it's turned out really sick. So excited to get the gears in. Oh, we also got all of the exhaust in, and drive shaft is fixed. So we got a new yoke on the end of there, got the right U-joints, kind of the right U-joints. This is something we're gonna have to watch out for because I did do a conversion joint. And I ordered this stuff before I went to Driveline and talked to them. And I didn't go to Driveline. Uncle Steve went to Driveline. Shout out Uncle Steve. But they let him know that these conversion joints, they're always greasable, so they actually are, you know, they have a hollow point inside of them, so they're not as strong. They think it'll be fine for this setup, but if we go to more horsepower in the future, it definitely needs to be changed. But overall, we're probably going to get a new drive shaft down the road. That way we don't have to worry about it, and we know we're just super solid. So, but yeah, we're almost there. We're almost ready to test. Uncle Steve has to come over and finish up the top end of the motor. He has a couple things to do there, get the carb on, and then we'll be able to crank this thing up, get the water back into it, and we gotta get some fuel back into it, and fire it up again, and check everything out. So other than that, I've been focusing on suspension, and he'll be over tomorrow. So we're almost there. And I think we're gonna go test without the rear bumper on. That way, just the whole time you can see the winner's quick change. Why not? All right, you guys. So got the rear end done. Got the axle bolts torqued. Got the fluid in the diff, and got the brake lines ran, and they're ready to be bled. So yeah, it was time to finally set this car down on the ground and see how things sit with the new springs, and to just check clearances in general. And here it is, on the ground for the first time. It's looking pretty good. We've got clearance in our sway bar. It's real tight, but we have clearance. At ride height, axles look pretty good. They're actually slightly down right now, but I'll get more into that because, as you see, we're pretty high up now. So I have the coil over at the max ride height that I can set it on the shock body. I did that because that's how I had it set with the 5K springs, and I really wanted to see the difference when I put these 8K springs in. And that tells me that it definitely can go lower. So Tori was out here, and I was having him push the car down and shake it so I can just see how everything reacts, and looks good. We probably will make an adjustment. We're gonna go out with this. I don't think I'm gonna mess with it unless it scales really bad at this ride height, which it might. But the reason is we can work our way down and fine tune kind of at the track, grip wise. But again, we'll see once we scale the car. Other than that, everything else looks really good. Pretty freaking pumped. Toast is pumped. But I do see that our axles have a little bit of a downward angle, so that tells me we'll be all right to lower it a bit more, because It's better than putting it on the ground and having our axles at upward angle, and we'd be increasing that angle every time our suspension compresses. So yeah. And what I'm also excited about is when we take this out, we are going to hook up a GoPro onto the rear bash bar. And I'm going to go test this thing without the bumper because it's freaking sick. And we're going to get a bunch of footage of the suspension, which is really cool to show you guys how everything works. But also going to be super cool for me because then I can kind of figure out what I want to change and how I can see some improvements in the geometry of the suspension back here for in the future when I decide to make some changes. Yeah, so I'm working on getting these these roll-off pads level. I have to reset them up compared to when we first used them, but I wanted to show you guys this with the car on the ground for the very first time. How sick everything is. Oh yeah, makes me happy. I was a little bit worried when the rear end was sitting maybe like 3 inches from the ground, but now it looks way better. Sick. We're almost there, almost time for some testing. I don't know if I showed you guys, but I added my little stripes on here. Now it looks like a pro car. Sweet. One last thing, I don't know if I showed this either. I got a new set of tires that we're going to be testing out on Monday as well. Some of you probably heard of them. They are the Zestino Agrovas. It is a tire sponsor for Spec D. So we get a pretty good deal on them, and I've heard really good things about them. So hoping to test them out and really like them and then run them for this season. Yeah, they look sick. They look a lot like the Bolinos, but we'll see if they're comparative. All right, you guys. Don't know where I left off at, but we were finishing up the car, and Uncle Steve was over, and we were working on getting the motor all put together and fired up, and we went to turn it over as we were putting fluids in. We wanted to crank it to get the water pump to move to see if we could bleed the system without firing the car. Go to crank it, and starter's not working. So we had pulled the solenoid, and we were going to replace the solenoid because the stud on it was completely loose and you can't service it. What we didn't know, and this is my fault because I put it in, is that the armature that actually engages the starter, when you take out the solenoid while it's hanging, it'll actually drop out of place. So that's what happened when I put the solenoid back in. I thought I had it in all right, but come to find out that actually slid down, and you can't do that in the car. So unfortunately, that turned into a fire drill, and basically there's some things we got to figure out with this car to make it a little more serviceable on the drivetrain aspect. But we had to pull transmission out, which means headers have to come out. Then we were able to get the starter off the bell housing, rebuild it, put it back in, test it, everything worked. So we were up pretty late last night, up early this morning, but we got the car fired up. I didn't show any of this because not worried about it. But yeah, so huge thank you to Uncle Steve for getting that taken care of. So we're good now. Cooling system's bled, motor fired up. We put a different jetting on the carb, and it sounds great, nice and crisp. But now I'm just working on tuning up the rear suspension a little bit. We scaled the car, and it was pretty good. Could be a little bit better, but for now we're not too worried about it because these springs are brand new, and we're gonna go run them. And obviously, as we run them a couple times, it's gonna change up a little bit. And then before we leave for Canada, we will scale again and check the suspension and everything. So yeah, finishing up a few things. Still gotta bleed brakes. Tori's gonna help me with that before we head over there. And yeah.